Hey guys, this is Doug with Fellowship of the Martyrs. I'm doing a video today about Rick Ross, who is a supposed cult expert that I've run into a couple times now. The Dr. Phil show is supposed to air tomorrow. Actually, it's 12:30 at night, so that's actually today, May the 21st. It's supposed to be on today and may repeat some. And I want to go ahead and have a video out there about Rick Ross and about my exchange with Rick Ross so that people understand a little bit better the context, because I don't expect at all for Dr. Phil to provide any good context. We were on stage for about an hour and a half, and that's going to get chopped up into 42 minutes. So there's going to be, half of everything that was said left out. And I'm sure that it's going to be the half that Dr. Phil and his editing crew wanted left out so as to make us look as bad as possible. But in part of the show, they're already playing up the previews where I tell Rick Ross that I don't owe him and he's the enemy. And I want to tell you some about him and why I feel fairly strongly about him and why I responded to him the way that I did, other than that, he's just a jerk. I'm reading some. Here's a picture of Rick Ross so that if you bump into him in the mall or whatever, you'll know who we're talking about. Rick, I'm reading from his Wikipedia page a little bit here. He is Rick Allen Ross, born in 1952. Is a consultant, lecturer, and intervention specialist with a focus on exit counseling and deprogramming of those belonging to cults. He runs a blog called Cult News. In 2003, founded the Rick Ross Institute, a little narcissistic, Rick, which maintains a database of court documents, essays, press articles on groups and individuals that have attracted controversy. Ross worked as an expert court witness and an analyst for the media in cases related to such groups. Okay, now then it kind of talks about how he got to be a cult expert. His interest in controversial religious groups dates to a 1982 incident in his grandmother's nursing home. He represented the Jewish community on a number of advisory committees in the 1980s. He began working full-time as a consultant, deprogramming members of controversial groups and movements. And by 2004, he had said he'd worked 350 cases with a 75% success rate. In 1993, Ross faced charges over 1991 forcible deprogramming, where he held a United Pentecostal Church International member, Jason Scott, against his will for 5 days, but was cleared the following year by a jury trial. He settled a civil suit in 1995 that he lost. He settled the suit, but he had to file bankruptcy because of the $2.5 million punitive damages that were awarded against him. 9-member jury unanimously held Ross and other defendants in the case liable for negligence and conspiracy to deprive Scott of his civil rights and religious liberties. Okay, this is a United Pentecostal Church member. Rick, on his website, has all kinds of groups listed as controversial cults, including the Assembly of God. Now, going on down in his website, he's lectured for a bunch of groups. He's been called as an expert witness. CBS hired him on a program to deprogram a 14-year-old boy who was a member of Potter's House Christian Fellowship. The kid, Aaron Perrin, refused to leave the organization and saw his mother as possessed by the devil. Most of the hour-long program focused on Ross's efforts to persuade parents to see the Potter's House as a destructive, Bible-based group, bent on taking control of its members' lives. The case resulted in the parties entering into an agreement that Potter's House would not harbor Aaron, entice him away from his mother, yabba, yabba, yabba. In 1992, now this is interesting, I want to mention some of this stuff. In 92 and 93, Ross opposed actions of the Branch Davidian group led by David Koresh in Waco, Texas. Ross had previously deprogrammed a member of the group. Ross was the only deprogrammer to work with Branch Davidian members prior to a siege involving the death of many of the group's members at Waco. Television broadcaster CBS hired Ross as an on-scene analyst for their coverage of the Waco siege. Ross offered unsolicited advice to the FBI during the standoff. A later Department of Justice report on the matter stated that the FBI did not rely on Ross for advice whatsoever during the standoff. According to the report, the FBI politely declined his unsolicited offers of assistance throughout the standoff and treated the information Ross supplied as it would any other unsolicited information received from the public. Criticism of government agencies' involvement with Ross has come from Nancy Ammerman, a professor of sociology of religion, who cited FBI interview notes which stated that Ross, quote, has a personal hatred for all religious cults, end quote. She claimed that the BATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the FBI did rely on Ross when he recommended that agents, quote, attempt to publicly humiliate Koresh, hoping to drive a wedge between him and his followers, end quote. She criticized them for doing so and ignoring the wider social sciences community. Other scholars also criticized Ross's involvement. Ross characterized his critics as cult apologists who held the belief that cult groups should not be held accountable for their actions like others within our society. Okay, then it goes on to talk about this Jason Scott deprogramming, where he forcibly snatched an 18-year-old from the Life Tabernacle Church, part of the United Pentecostal Church, in 1991. They took him, two men hired by Scott's mother, seized him outside her house. The teenager was handcuffed and forced into a van before being transported to a beach cottage for the deprogramming. Ross and his partners walked him into the house, one of the men leading him on a nylon leash, another holding his handcuffs. Ross and his partners had made the house a virtual prison. Scott was restrained and told his release depended on the completion of the session. Scott testified that he then endured 5 days of derogatory comments about himself, his beliefs, his girlfriend, his pastor, and diatribes by Ross about the ways in which Christianity and conservative Protestantism were wrong. Okay. He was intimidated, forced to watch videos on cults, and told his church was just the same. He said he was watched 24 hours a day. When Scott threatened Ross with criminal prosecution, Ross was said to have threatened Scott that he would handcuff him to the bed frame. After 4 days, Scott began to pretend that he had changed his mind, feigning tears and remorse, in the hope that this would in due course give him a chance to escape. The final day of his imprisonment, he spent watching films on New Age religion and channeling, even though neither are related to Pentecostalism. Scott's plan ultimately worked. Ross, pleased with the apparent success of the deprogramming session, proposed that they all went out to meet with Scott's family for a celebratory dinner. In the restaurant, Scott was allowed to go to the restroom by himself. He ran out and called the police, who arrested Ross and his companions on suspicion of unlawful imprisonment. Initially, the charges were dismissed. However, at the civil trial, Ross and his co-defendants were found liable for conspiracy to deprive Scott of his civil rights and religious liberties. Scott was awarded nearly $5 million. The judge awarded $875,000 in compensatory damages and punitive damages in the amount of $1 million against CAN, $2.5 million against Ross, and $250,000 against each of the two other individual defendants. The case bankrupted CAN, the Cult Awareness Network. In addition, the jury held the defendants, excluding CAN, liable for intentional infliction of emotional distress, finding they, quote, intentionally or recklessly acted in a way so outrageous in character and so extreme in degree as to go beyond all possible bounds of decency and to be regarded as atrocious and utterly intolerable in a civilized community, end quote. In 1995, Ross filed for personal bankruptcy because of the damages awarded against him in the Scott civil trial. Scott settled with him, yabba, yabba, yabba. He later started the Ross Institute for Internet Archives for the study of destructive cults, controversial groups, and movements, and so on. Now, in his earlier life, he was adopted in 1953. In 1974, at the age of, he completed his high school degree, did not attend college. In 1974, at the age of 21, he was convicted of the attempted burglary of a vacant model home and sentenced to probation. The following year, he robbed a jewelry store in Phoenix. Ross confessed to the crime and received 5 years probation. Following high school, he went to work for a finance company and then a Phoenix area bank. Worked for a salvage company, whatever. Now, the reason he got involved in cult stuff, it says here, 1982, following a visit with his grandmother at Phoenix's Kivel home, a Jewish residential and nursing facility where she lived, Ross learned that missionary affiliates of the locally produced Jewish Voice broadcast had infiltrated the home of staff members in order to specifically target Jews for conversion to Pentecostal Christianity. After bringing the matter to the attention of the home's director of the local Jewish community, Ross successfully campaigned to have the group's activity stopped. He then began working as a volunteer, lecturer, and researcher for a variety of Jewish organizations. He worked for the Jewish Federation of Greater Phoenix. The Union of American Hebrew Congregations appointed him to 2 national committees focusing on cults and interreligious affairs. During the 1980s, Ross represented the Jewish community on the Religious Advisory Committee of the Arizona Department of Corrections. It goes on to some other stuff that he did. Okay. Now, my first interaction with Rick Ross is when I got a call from him and the father of Andrew Copeland, who was here with us for a while. There were some videos of him on YouTube playing the guitar and other stuff. Andrew's father had asked Andrew to come home and visit them in Hawaii. Andrew had been here a couple of times off and on. When Andrew got to Hawaii, his father had Rick Ross, who charges $5,000, it says from Wikipedia, per incident to help deprogram somebody. He had flown Rick Ross out to Hawaii, and which I'm sure was a nice vacation, and was there waiting to have an intervention with Andrew and convince him that he was part of a cult. Andrew, dear sweet childlike faith Andrew, when Rick Ross started bad-mouthing Fellowship of the Martyrs because he had seen some videos online, Andrew asked him if he'd ever been here. Well, of course not. Had he ever talked to me? No. So Andrew asked him, do you believe God talks to people? Well, can you say Jesus is Lord? Well, I'm a professional. Blah, blah, blah. So Andrew turns to his dad and says, why do you have me talking to this guy? He's not even one of us. He can't say Jesus is Lord. He doesn't even believe God talks to people. Why you having me even talk to this guy? His dad goes to the Lutheran Church, claims to be a Christian. I've had talks with him on the phone before. So Andrew refused to talk to him and just marched off, stormed out. Forget it, I'm not doing it. And just at one point, just his dad talked him into coming back. And he got browbeaten so much by Rick that he just cried. He just hit his knees and was just grieved. Not crying because he was particularly being emotional, but crying because, you know, how could his dad, who claims to be a Christian, listen to this guy over his own son? Listen to this guy over God? Well, Andrew eventually came back, did fine with us, and went back home later on. And him and his dad got in a fight. Not exactly a fight, but they were basically forcing him into mental counseling and stuff like that. Andrew was always sort of hot-tempered and got, at some point, you know, I wasn't there, but it got a little bit physical, and that was the justification they needed to have him institutionalized and medicated to the hilt, to call him schizophrenic, and to lock him down so that he could never come back to liberty, or basically have any freedom, and they could control him better. Now, Rick accuses me of this kid having a meltdown, but Andrew was fine when he was here. Before he came here, he was a mess. While he was here, he was fine. When he went back, he was a mess. So I'm more focused on the family system that was involved, the parenting, the control, his Navy captain dad, and not so much the fact that it's somehow our fault. Anyway, so what do I think of Rick Ross? Well, he has no college degree. He has no master's degree. He has no doctoral degree. He has no counseling certificate. He has no credentials whatsoever to be anything that he's doing. When I was on the Dr. Phil show at one point, which probably won't make it in the edit, Dr. Phil lamented about how the internet has allowed all these people to think they can have a megaphone and present themselves as something, like the TV hasn't done that. And then he brings out Rick Ross, who is the epitome of a self-made internet yahoo. He's got nothing except a finger-pointing website and some credentials for being called, because there's no like degree in like cult expert. There's no certification for deprogramming or whatever. You can pretty much just claim to be one, and since there aren't very many, somebody is going to call you as an expert, interview you, and you'll start to build resume. And he's been at this a long time and found that he can make a good living by being a professional finger pointer. And I have found him to be completely dishonest. When we were on the Dr. Phil show, he starts, when Dr. Phil says, and what do you have to say? And he starts by setting up a scenario where a cult leader is anybody that has an answer for everything, that has a defense. Anytime that you try to point out a problem, he's got a defense for it. He's gonna, he's gonna tell you his side of everything, and that's a sure sign you're dealing with a cult leader. I'm like, that's a sure sign you're in a high school debate class. That's a sure sign. My mother would be a cult leader by that definition, because she had an answer for everything, and she was real sure that she knew what she was doing. And when she waved the wooden spoon, you couldn't talk her out of, spanking you. That's goofy. That the definition of a cult leader is somebody that has an answer for everything. Why would I not have an answer for everything? You're going to ask me a question, I'm like, oh, I never thought of that. That never even occurred to me. I've just been going through my life without ever thinking about that before. The Bible says to be sure of what you believe, to be ready, to be quick with an answer for everything, for what you believe and why you're doing what you're doing. So he sets up this scenario where anybody that's defensive and responds defensively is a cult leader. And then he says, so Doug, you're a cult leader, right? No, of course I'm not a cult leader. See? He denies it. That proves he's a cult leader. It's that kind of logic. It's not based on fact. It's not based on interviews with people here. It's not based on anything about how the organization is run or anything. He is Jewish, whether he's practicing or not, whether he believes it or not, whether he's genetically, culturally a Jew or religiously a Jew, I don't know. But he hates Protestant Christianity, okay? And he is going to automatically believe that anyone that says they hear God is in a cult, needs to be medicated, needs to be institutionalized, or whatever else. So he is automatically not on my team. Automatically not somebody that is going to argue in our defense in any situation. So I regret that on the Dr. Phil show, I didn't make it more clear to Dr. Phil the confessed criminal, kidnapper, and generally jerk that he was dealing with. Self-made YouTube personality who I'm not sure would know the voice of God if it, bit him right in the behind. If you are going to automatically dismiss religious belief that is different than yours and want to medicate people because they disagree with you, you are no kind of expert. You are in no kind of position to deprogram anybody. You are, you are a whore, taking the money to get people out of whatever they're in because their parents paid you. Whether you've ever known anything about that group or not. He didn't know boo about Fellowship of the Martyrs. He hasn't talked to the people here. He hasn't talked to the people. All he knows is the noise of the haters that are on YouTube that say I'm a cult. Oh, that's good enough for me. They're Protestant, charismatic Christians. That's automatically a cult. So I'll take the money and I'll get your kid out of there. And I can tell you he had no effect on Andrew. If he claims to have a 75% success rate, Andrew is not one of the successes. Andrew absolutely would not be doing that. Now, he wants me to accept responsibility for Andrew as a life that I've wrecked and whatever. Andrew is going through EMT training, is preparing to be useful, carry a job, whatever. He worked while he was here. He, this is not, he makes it sound like there's some kid foaming at the mouth somewhere and it's my fault. And that's not the case at all. Andrew is basically imprisoned by the legal system that has been turned against him by his parents who have money. And I think it's really wrong. And I'd like them to call me and talk about it a little bit. But blaming me is not the right idea at all. That kid was a mess. God love him. He knows that I love him. That family was dysfunctional way before I ever heard of them or they heard of me. And Andrew was fine when he was here. The meltdown comes when he's back in that family system that was dysfunctional from the very beginning. And I have some pastoral responsibility to not talk about how dysfunctional and in what ways they were dysfunctional, whatever. But, I can assure you, he was fine when he was here. It's when he was with them that problems started. And it was because of the control and the fear and whatever. I think I got an automatic problem when a Christian parent hires a non-Christian cult deprogrammer to beat on their kid, belittle them, insult the people they care about and have bonded with no information, no background, just I want another voice who's an expert to beat my kid into submission. There's something real wrong there. Something real wrong there. And when you are forcibly kidnapping people, and later on in the article it says that he's agreed that that's not a good idea. We really shouldn't forcibly kidnap people anymore. Mainly because it cost him so much. Because if he had felt like it had worked and he had got away with it, he'd be doing it again. He'd be doing it all the time. He'd be kidnapping lots of people. Because he's still doing and talking to them the same way he did. He's just not handcuffing them because the legal costs can add up too much too fast. Anyway, I'm not going to back off of my opinion that Rick Ross is not on my team, is part of the enemy's team, and is absolutely somebody that I owe no explanation to for anything that I do or say. I am not accountable to you. You don't own me, and I don't owe you nothing. Now, I'm not intervening in your life and telling you this and that and whatever. And you feel free to warn people against me all you want, and I'm going to warn people against you. If people call this guy and pay him money to take away your kids' rights, to beat your kids' beliefs out of them, you're going to get what you get. You're going to get what you get. Something's real wrong with all of this. Now, even, here it is. It says in 1986, Ross left the staff of the JFCS, that's Jewish Family and Children's Service, and the Bureau of Jewish Education in Phoenix, Arizona, to become a full-time private consultant and deprogrammer. He undertook a number of involuntary deprogramming interventions at the request of parents whose children had joined controversial groups and movements. Okay, children probably does not mean minors. Children probably means people that are over 18. And involuntary deprogramming means you snatch them. By 2004, Ross had handled more than 350 deprogramming cases in various countries, typically charging around $5,000 per case. Ross claimed a success rate of 75%. Journalist Nick Johnstone, despite noting that Ross's moral credentials seemed shaky at best, credited him with having rescued many people from harmful situations. Okay, yeah, I'm not, I think that's a real understatement to say his moral credentials are shaky at best. I think this guy has a long history of problems, all the way from being a kid, breaking into stuff, breaking into a jewelry store. I don't know how. Okay, I don't know how you rob a jewelry store and get 5 years probation. I mean, without some good Jewish lawyers. This is a guy with a lot of deep anger issues that probably needs some significant therapy to learn how to behave in civilized society and let people believe what they feel like they want to believe without beating them down and making money on the beatdown. I got no respect for professional finger pointers, and his website is egregious. There's a bunch of groups, a bunch of people. It says here, organizations cited by Ross as groups to watch include the Kabbalah Center, Shabbat of Southern Nevada, the Greater Los Angeles International Church of Christ, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Unification Church, Falun Gong, among others, included in his individual files at the group information database on Ross's website are names such as Deepak Chopra, Nation of Islam, Patty Hearst. Some have expressed displeasure about their inclusion in these lists. I'm kind of displeased that I'm not on the list. After, I'd encourage Rick to get me on there as quick as possible, because Fellowship of the Martyrs isn't on the list, and I just expect to continue to cross paths with him, and I want to make it real clear. He's a hack. He's a hack with a chip on his shoulder that hates Protestant charismatic Christianity, and I'm going to have to respond to him as such from now on. So anyway, come to your own conclusions, do some research and see. I hope you don't ever have to talk to him or deal with him. He's fairly insufferable. And on the show, I don't know how they'll cut it and everything, but I kind of respond to him in the same childish way he responded to me, because there's no other way to talk to this guy. So anyway, that's all for now. I hope you'll pray for him. I'll be praying for him. I hope that he finds Jesus and gets his act right and finds some love in his heart, because I haven't seen any. I've seen a lot of finger pointing and a lot of twisting, not being fair, not seeking truth, and selling what he does for whoever's the highest bidder, no matter whether he agrees with them or not. So that's all for now. I want to just give you some background on the characters we're dealing with here, and going to do a little bit on Dr. Phil personally, and some of the stuff that he's supporting, and why it's really not right for him to come after us when he's supporting the stuff he is supporting. So anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for listening. More on fellowshipofthemartyrs.com. In the name of Jesus, amen.